Okay, everybody, welcome to our simulations, games and SABR games and simulation meeting tonight, May the 8th. We've had a little bit of technical difficulties, but as we all know with computers, that's normal. Uh, Tonight, I want to welcome Steve Etzel. Uh, did I say that right, Steve?
You did. Thank you.
Awesome. Um, and he's going to be talking about reverse engineering of a whole bunch of simulation games, especially the ones that aren't around anymore, to make the cards and stuff for the players. Um, it's quite the topic and it's quite the activity, I'm sure. So I'm just going to hand it over to Steve and let him go. We'll have some announcements and stuff at the end, and hopefully Derek will be. Everybody else will be able to hear Derek, or he'll be able to hear us. Okay, so go ahead, Steve.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for your work coordinating this group. It's been interesting to participate the last year or so. Um, I have a bunch of slides here, and I'm going to see if I can get through most of them, if not all of them. But with that, I'll just get started. I'm going to talk a little bit about my background, particularly as it relates to baseball simulation games. The main part of the presentation is about reverse engineering a game, and then a related topic, which I might get to, is how do you assess the accuracy of a sim? And then if there's time, maybe we can talk about some other sim design considerations. So almost exactly 4 years ago, I retired from my day job, if you will. I was a finance executive. I built a lot of spreadsheets in my time. Um, I wrote a few computer programs early in my career, and I'm fairly analytical, I guess I would say. As it relates to baseball games and simulations, in my mid-teens, in the mid-70s, I created a simple pitch-by-pitch game, and I'll show you that in a minute. A little later, in the late 70s, I created a kind of a more sophisticated game, which I've since called vintage baseball, and we'll talk about that for a second. But right after college, in the early 80s, I graduated, I got a new job. I was working a lot of hours. I got married not that long afterwards. We had kids, and all this baseball stuff literally went in a box, not to be opened for 40 some years until after I retired and we were relocating. And it was kind of nostalgic to pull out this box and see what was in it and remind myself of all the fun I had many years ago. As was mentioned, I have been in the last 3 years, I guess I would say, analyzing games and building spreadsheets, preparing player cards, and so on. There's a list here on the screen. I've also taken a look at some modern games, but that's more for my own purposes, and we'll talk about that in a second. So this is a piece of tablet paper from my junior high school days where I wrote down the rules to the first pitch-by-pitch game. There were two D6 dice. Uh, Instead of summing them up, you generally subtracted them, and these were the rules. First, you did balls and strikes until there was either strikeout, a walk, or the ball went in play. Once the ball was in play, you rolled again to see if the batter was safe or out. And then if he was safe, then you rolled again to see what kind of hit it was. And there were a few other rules, including stolen bases and whatnot, but very generic. There were no specific player cards or anything. So one of the first things I did when I dug this stuff out a few years ago was to kind of more formalize this game, tune up the math a little bit and so on. And it's gone through a few iterations, but this is kind of what it looks like now, which, I've got the ability to make custom player cards, and I've turned it into kind of a 50-50 game where the one six-sided dice is a decider die, pitcher versus batter. This happens to be Roberto Clemente's card. You roll balls and strikes on the left side. Um, if the ball goes in play, then you go over to the right side and you roll the dice for the result. And these codes are actually the Sports Illustrated game codes from the Sports Illustrated game in the early 70s. So I did that and have been doing that actually even up till recently. Um, then I mentioned that I had this other game, and uh, this game starts out as like a 50-50 game where, half the time you'll check the pitcher, half the time you'll check the batter. But really what you're doing in the first step is checking for a walk or a strikeout. Kind of like the earlier game I mentioned, if there's no walk or strikeout, then you go on and you kind of move on to a safe out check, which we'll talk about on the next slide. One of the things I understood from that early age was that in a pure 50-50 game, there's some issues if the pitcher card and the batter card don't interact. And so I did have some interaction between the two cards. So like, for example, if you had a Nellie Fox or a Manny Sanguian who didn't walk that much, there was a way to override some of that, and same thing for uh, pitcher's ability or lack thereof to give up or control home runs. I had a feature for that too. I started out with 6 teams, mostly World Series teams, except for the 62 Mets. And then I did add 2 more teams in 2022. I have a picture of the baseball encyclopedia and a calculator because when I was working on this game, it was all done pretty much by hand, and the baseball encyclopedia was the only data source I had. But it was enough. And it's a lot different than it is now, where you have baseball reference and retro sheet and Fangraphs and Excel and whatnot. But a lot of these vintage games that I'm going to be talking about, they had limited resources as well, whether it be data or computations or what have you. So I give these people a ton of respect for what they came up with, um, given the tools that they had. Um, I had a little bit of left-right platoon splits in my game. I'll show you that on the next page, and I've refined that a little bit more recently. So if you look in the upper left, you see a sample of the original pitcher card and batter card. And so pitchers and batters both had a walk rating and a strikeout rating, and AAA was the best and Triple H was the worst. So here you had Dick Hall, who hardly ever walked anybody, and here you have Willie Stargell, who struck out a lot. As I said, if there isn't a walk and there isn't a strikeout, then you've kind of move on to the ball is being in play. And that's where you kind of overlay the pitcher card and the batter card. And so Willie Stargell, you see, had a 423, what I called hit percent, which is pretty close to batting average for balls in play. Not exactly, but close. And then you overlay Dick Hall's I guess adjustment, if you will. And so if Dick Hall is pitching to Willie Stargell in this example, if the ball gets in play, Stargell's going to get on base almost half the time. Now, that presumes he doesn't strike out, which he is going to strike out. Anyway, that's kind of the basic mechanic of the game. If Stargell turns out to be safe, you turn his card over, and you see on the right, you roll one more time, and there's all kinds of hit types, if you will. And you can see kind of at the bottom that almost a third of Stargell's hits were home runs once he actually hit them. Anyway, I was working on this game then when I was in college. I was taking a lot of computer classes in addition to my accounting classes. And one summer, I actually wrote a program that would generate the cards. And you see Tommy Agee's card in the lower left. And this program would print out the pitcher card and the batter cards, both front and back. And so that's an example of Tommy Agee from the '69 Mets. More recently, now that I have, Excel and it's 40 some years later, I've taken a shot at making the cards look really nice. And that's what you see here at the bottom. The other thing I did, and I alluded to this, is I refined the pitcher splits, the platoon splits, if you will, which is circled at the bottom. And so now there's a separate walk rating for a walk and strikeout rating and hit adjustment rating for versus left-hand batter and versus right-hand batter. Interestingly about Dick Hall is his splits were actually backwards. He's a right-hand pitcher, but right-handers seem to hit him well. Anyways, enough about that game, but that was really these two games were really my introduction to the hobby, if you will. So when the first weekend that there was a COVID lockdown, which was probably around March 15th, I recorded my first YouTube video. Now it wasn't baseball because this wasn't on my radar screen at this point, but I did create a channel and I recorded a few videos on a different topic. But I do have this YouTube channel, and once I did get back into the sim world, um, I would listen to a lot of videos, and I guess that inspired me to document my journey uh, along the way. And so I captured some statistics for the channel, but as of a couple weeks ago, there's 777 subscribers. People have watched over 3,000 hours of content, and I've recorded, I think I counted over 90 baseball themed videos along the way. So for the main topic, why reverse engineer a baseball sim? Well, many of the games were only produced for a few years, and there could be reasons for that. Maybe they weren't profitable. For many of them, the Major League Baseball Players Association was trying to extract licensing fees, and that became prohibitive. For some game manufacturers, as I alluded, a lot of this probably was done manually, and so it's labor intensive to produce, um, a season set, um, and then you have to get them printed up and produced and shipped and blah blah blah. So a lot of these games only lasted a few years, and most of us in this hobby or baseball in general, nostalgia plays a big role. And I've come across for a lot of these vintage games that people want to play um, other teams other than what was originally in the offering with these favorite games from the past. And nostalgia comes up a lot in these discussions. And I'll be totally honest. It's intellectual curiosity on my part. I enjoyed trying to figure out a game as much as I do playing, although I'm trying to change that more recently. I have a point at the bottom which is very important, and that is I want to be very sensitive to the game creator's intellectual property. And that's why I try to stay away from modern games other than just for my own purposes. Um, I actually got booted off of a Facebook group when I made a post about reverse engineering batter up, just because even though the game was out of print, the person in principle just thought it wasn't morally right to be reverse engineering somebody else's game. I am sensitive to the topic, although I feel comfortable with the work I've done. So there's a lot of general considerations when you're reverse engineering a sim. and one of them was the original sim accurate? I'm going to talk about it, hopefully talk about accuracy later, but there's lots of definitions of accuracy. You know, what data and tools were available at the time the sim was developed. We talked about that. You know, what's the embedded precision in the sim? Like Status Pro used two eight-sided dice, so it was base eight. A lot of sims use two or three D6 dice now. More modern sims will use 10-sided dice or 20-sided dice, or maybe some combination of what I've shown here. Another interesting question is, how were intentional walks treated? I generally exclude them when I do any of my calculations, assuming that's in the manager's hands to intentionally walk somebody. Other games card the player with all of his walks, which not right or wrong. It's just a preference. So the other question is, what do you do if you think the original sim was not accurate? And that kind of creates a dilemma, uh, which I kind of balance things. I try to maintain the feel or the spirit of the original sim, but there may be cases where I just think it wasn't quite accurate enough, and I may um, change the formula or add new features or some kind of homebrew rule or something like that. And we may get to this, but you may do all this work, but you really need to test the results of your work to know whether it's right or wrong or useful or not useful. So what's the general approach? Well, initially, you have to understand the game engine and what the dice probabilities are. You need to understand the rules. It can be helpful to play the game and understand the charts and understand the ratings and not only the range of ratings, but the distribution of the ratings across the player population. You spend a lot of time analyzing the cards themselves and the layouts of the cards, because sometimes that's important to people where certain results show up on a card. Um, and then once you're ready, you set up a spreadsheet. I've listed below some ingredients to success. Um, the ones on the left make a lot of sense. I mean, obviously, you got to do the analysis, which I've already mentioned. You've got to employ logic, but then there's a lot of trial and error, which fortunately spreadsheets allow you to do. And I'm not really joking here, but at times divine inspiration and persistence are your real friends here, because sometimes you'll run into roadblocks when you're reverse engineering a sim. So there's different types of game engines. A lot of us are probably familiar with them. Um, One of the most famous is the 50/50 model, which is employed by Stratomatic and another vintage game, Long Ball. And I think we had Pursue the Pennant, the guy on a few months ago. I think that's a 50/50 game. So that's common. There are also kind of pitcher first, then batter models. And the modern game payoff pitches kind of that way. Sports Illustrated Baseball, which we'll talk about, is like that. And Batter Up, the topic of tonight, is like that. And another game called Grand Slam. There could also be batter first and then modified by the pitcher, which I think is a fair description of the APA engine. And there could be other models or hybrids. I mentioned Status Pro. I think Replay Baseball probably fits that. Um, I alluded to this, but you really need to understand the mechanism for producing the random results or the random events. It could be dice, it could be fast action cards. Some of the old games had spinners. And then I alluded to this, but how refined can the results be given whatever mechanism you've chosen? For example, how many and what type of dice. And I don't know if I have this on a slide or not, but games that have a lot of precision are not necessarily accurate, but I don't think you can have a truly accurate game unless you have some minimum level of precision, if any of that made sense. Okay, as I said, most people are probably familiar with a 50-50 model. This happens to be long ball. And so there were two eight-sided dice numbered 0 to 7. And that means there's 64 total chances, 32 of them on the batter card for dice rolls 0 to 37, and 32 on the pitcher card, which is dice rolls 40 to 77. And long ball was almost entirely a pure 50-50 game, but there was a little bit of interaction between the pitcher and the batter card. But that's the topic for another day. I will say this, if I didn't say it already, anything I'm going to talk about tonight, there is at least one video on my channel on the topic, including long ball. Okay, Batter Up. Batter Up was published for 4 years. Initially, I thought it was 3, but I found out it was 4. From 76 to 79, covering the seasons 1975 to 1978. A friend and I did a lot of research on Batter Up. Ideally, we would have located the creators. We really weren't able to locate them. They may not even be alive if they were in their 30s and the mid 70s, maybe they're 80 or whatever. Can't do math in my head, believe it or not. But anyways, we could not find them. They had this Astra game company. It was based in New York. We were able to find out that the company itself has been legally dissolved. I contacted some local organizations in that town. We just didn't find any additional information. So given that, we felt reasonably safe in publishing some of the game collateral, if you will, and proceeding with the reverse engineering process. I mentioned the game engine and the pitcher first, or the flow through engine. Batter Up was not the first one to use this. Actually, if you go back to the 60s, there was the Be a Manager game, and it had more or less that engine. And then in the early 70s, you had the Sports Illustrated baseball game with the multicolored charts. And that used the same idea, pitcher first, then batter. And Batter Up, I think, essentially copied Sports Illustrated in many ways, as we'll see. And then for at least 1 year, there was a game called Grand Slam, which worked kind of the same way. And in modern times, we have Inside Pitch as a game, and it also is pitcher first, then batter. And they're all a little different, but the general concept's the same. And my point is, you kind of need to understand this to make any further progress. And so I had done a lot of work already on the Sports Illustrated game. Fortunately, somebody in the past had documented some of the formulas that you could use to create player cards or team charts. And so that gave me a starting point for Batter Up. So Sports Illustrated and Batter Up use kind of three 6-sided dice, but kind of labeled uniquely. And so when you have 3 6-sided dice, there's 216 chances. But the way these dice are configured, the results, which can add up, which can be 1 to 30, there's 30 different results, if you will, occur unevenly. So there's number 10 in Batter Up, result or dice roll number 10, which you would get by adding the red die, which is the tens digit, and adding the 2 black die for the ones digit. There's only one chance out of 216 that can happen, the way the dice are configured. And that's about 0.5%. On the other hand, the dice rolls in the mid-20s in batter up are much more frequent, and the most frequent ones, like 25 and 26, occur a little over 8% of the time. It makes card creation or chart creation a little interesting, but the interesting thing about this is these probabilities are identical to the Sports Illustrated probabilities. The only difference is Sports Illustrated, I think, went from 10 to 39 instead of 1 to 30, but identical probabilities. So this is what the batter up player cards look like. So this is from the 1977 season. And so, as I said, you roll the dice and you start on the pitcher card and you look at the results 1 through 30. And if there's a result, like say dice roll number 5 is a 12, well, that's a single, and so you stop there. It's a single, you're done. But if the dice roll was number 4 and there's a blank, that means you roll again, and you roll against the batter card on the right, and then again you read the result. There's a wide variety of results that can occur on the pitcher card, and I've listed them at the bottom here if you can see that, but almost every result possible you can get on the pitcher card, except for maybe triples. On the batter card, you get all the possible results, including triples, but not wild pitches or pass balls. So wild pitches and pass balls are entirely controlled from the pitcher card. But that's the basic engine. So I would say, in some respects, batter up is most like a combination of Sports Illustrated and APA. And you'll see the APA influence here in a second. So just like APA, there are 8 result boards, if you will, for each of the 8 on-base situations. And I've shown parts of 2 of them here. And so, if the bases are empty, you use one chart. If the runner on first, you use the next chart. And so the next step here, once I understood the basic model, was I went and I read all 400 line items on the charts and summarized them in a spreadsheet to get a feel for how these result boards were laid out. And one of the most important things I saw pretty quickly is for a given number, result number, which go from 1 to 50, by the way, the result was fairly consistent across the different on-base situations. So result 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 is always going to be a home run. Your result 8 or 9 is almost always going to be a triple. There's a few exceptions here and there, but much more straightforward, I guess I would say, than maybe the APA boards. So this was an important step just to get a sense of how the game was laid out. So now I'm ready to decide, okay, how do you put the results on the cards? The batters are pretty straightforward. You just take their stats, you prorate them across 216 chances for the most part, and that's what goes on their chart or their card. It's not exactly like that, but let's just keep it simple. Pitchers are a little more complicated, and so I started with walks, and I kind of used what I knew from the Sports Illustrated game, and I came up with what I thought the formula should be, and I could not get the walk chances on the pitcher cards to match what I thought they should be. And so this was my first roadblock, and it's like, how am I going to figure this out? And so what I ended up doing is I said, okay, let's see if there's a correlation between the walk chances on the pitcher card and their walk rate, if you will, which is unintentional walks divided by plate appearances, or what I call adjusted plate appearances. And sure enough, I took a sampling of cards. I calculated the statistic. I documented the number of walk chances on the card. And you can see there's a 99% correlation. It's like, voila, I have maybe not the exact formula for walks, but I've got one that's just as good as the original. And I would say that was where inspiration came in. So I used the same idea for strikeouts, and then I did the same thing for hits on pitcher cards. And unlike Sports Illustrated, Batter Up has hits, some amount of hits on essentially all pitcher cards. So that's one big difference. So the correlation actually wasn't as good, but there was a correlation. And in the end, I determined this formula that I derived from the regression analysis was good enough for putting hits on the pitcher card. And I'll do my best to explain why it doesn't matter all that much. But so this diagram is something I think kind of visually a lot of times. And so I built this diagram, which kind of is a visual depiction of the engine or the model. And then the top half of this chart is kind of the pitcher results, and the bottom half is the batter results. So I know what's on the batter card. I mentioned that. I figured out wild pitches and pass balls and how to put those on the pitcher card. And then those result in a reroll anyway. And then as I said, I did the correlation to figure out the walks on the pitcher card. Hit by pitch was pretty easy. I knew how many hits to put on the pitcher card, as I showed on the previous slide. But then, how many outs should I put on the pitcher card? And essentially what I needed to do conceptually is put enough outs on the pitcher card when combined with hits on the pitcher card, and when combined with the times that the result came off the batter card, I needed to put enough outs on the pitcher card to make his batting average against work out. And I thought about this for a couple of days, like how am I going to do that? And then once I do it, how am I going to split the outs between strikeouts and other outs? So I thought about this for a couple of days. I was scribbling in my notebook. And then kind of this is when persistence and divine inspiration came in. And ultimately, I used algebra to come up with how many outs should be on the pitcher card. And I threw this little comic in here because I always laugh at it when I see it. But this guy's on his deathbed and he says, "Ha, I did it. I lived my whole life without ever once using algebra." Well, for better or worse, that's not me. I did use algebra, and it kind of saved the day. Had I not figured that out, I'm not sure the project could have continued. But I did figure it out. And just as an aside, I tried to figure out the algebra again from scratch recently, and I couldn't do it. So I'm really lucky I got it right the first time. Okay, so I've summarized really at a high level how you figure out what to put on the cards for the core engine. But if you're going to reverse engineer a sim, you're not done yet. So for batters and fielders, there can be one or two base running ratings, usually for just general speed, and also for stolen bases. And there may be a so-called jump rating, or the ability to get a lead. There may be a feature in the sim where you want people to hit into double plays and the frequency that they did in real life, which I did infuse into Batter Up. I don't know if it had it originally. Hit and run ratings, bunting ratings, defense ratings. They can be simple, they can be complex. If they're complex, there may be a separate range rating, error rate rating. There may be a double play or a pivot rating. Catchers may have a pass ball rating. Pitchers may have a pass ball rating. Throwing arms for catchers and outfielders, and then injuries. And then over on the pitcher side, you know, uh, I think it's very important that a sim have the ability for the pitcher to allow or restrict home runs um, if they gave up a lot or gave up a few relative to the average. That's important. So you might need a rating for that. Again, for base stealing, you might need a hold rating, which may affect the the, the jump rating or may affect the stolen base success rate, double plays again. Another one is fatigue. A lot of sims have a fatigue rating, so you need to come up with some formula to replicate the fatigue rating. So it's just a way to say that there's a lot of work. Fortunately, dealing with multiple sims, I was able to reuse a lot of my rating formulas that I um, came up with. So uh, if any of this about Batter Up and the reverse engineering has been interesting to you, there is a video on my channel where I describe in greater detail what I just described. Um, Before I go on to the next section, I'll pause and see if there are questions up to this point. If not, I'm going to keep going. So, as I alluded to at the beginning, it's all good, well and good to come up with these formulas and have a pretty good level of confidence that you think um, you've done it right. But you really don't know if you've done it right unless or until you come up with some mechanism to test the 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 results or verify the general accuracy of what you've come up with. And one methodology I came up with is to uh, develop a card for the average batter and a card for the average pitcher, and then match up various pitchers and batters against those average batters uh, and calculate what that matchup would produce and see if the statistics are close to the original statistics of the player. And um, I did those tests both on the original cards from the game and from those that I generated. And I was able to confirm the directional accuracy of my formulas. And occasionally I went back and did some tweaks to the spreadsheet. So it's an iterative process. I would say the original batter cards seemed okay. I'm not so sure about some of the original pitcher cards, but based on my experience with Sports Illustrated, that's not completely unexpected. Uh, Unless you really came up with this algebra formula that I did, it's going to be hard to get the pitcher card truly accurate. And then, when I was going through some of the running ratings and stealing ratings and, some of those other ratings that I just mentioned, occasionally I found inconsistencies, either in the original ones or tweaks that I needed to make to my formula. We do have a Facebook group. It's called Astra Batter Up and Other Lost Baseball Games. That's where we've put a lot of the collateral for the game, and we've posted some of the original seasons, and there's a ton of homebrew cards that we've made with my spreadsheet. In addition to me making teams, Larry, who is on the call, has been making teams. He made the entire 1981 National League team set, and that's posted out there. And there's another guy, Peter, who has made a lot of different teams as well. So between the three of us, there's quite a few sets of teams to choose from. And actually, there's a fourth guy that started doing it recently, a guy named Mike, and he's pumped out quite a few teams in a fairly short period of time. So it seems like we're consistently, making new teams. I just reviewed the 1966 World Series teams and posted them up in the last couple of days. So that continues on. I said I wanted to talk about accuracy of sims, and I think the first thing you have to do is define what you mean by accuracy. And I like to talk about both relative and absolute accuracy. And when I say relative, I mean, is a good player better than an average player, better than a poor player? So are the players going to produce results that make sense relative to each other? And then there's absolute accuracy, and we'll talk more about this, but over a long period of time, will the player card produce statistical results that resemble his original performance? I've been reminded by people, though, that when you take a big step back, what's most important is that the game be realistic and the results be plausible. And maybe that's the real test. You can assess accuracy in different ways. I'm going to talk more about that on the next page, but some of the things you can use to assess the accuracy is, did the team produce the same win-loss record that they had in real life or something similar? Or were the team stats or the league stats for things like runs scored and runs allowed and all that, were they somewhat similar to the original stats? But you can do it on a micro level, and you can look at individual player performances and all kinds of statistics for the individual player and see if they make sense. So how do you assess the accuracy? And I'm going to start probably with the least important way, and maybe the better ways at the bottom. But what you'll find on the Delphi forum and other places is you'll have some people that play a few games and make a declaration that this game runs hot, or this game had too many errors, or this game had not enough doubles, or whatever. That's, given the way statistics work and variability, that's just not a good way to assess whether a sim is accurate. You will find that a lot of people do full as played season replays. But even with real lineups, there's a lot of variables that can affect the results. Pretty much as soon as the first batter steps into the plate and produces a result, the game isn't going to resemble the original game. And so you're going to have some variability. And then, as I alluded, just natural statistical variability is going to produce a wide range of results, even with a full season replay. Another way you can assess the accuracy of a sim is to write a simulation, either with a program, maybe you could do it in a spreadsheet, but basically you could replay the season using computer, like multiple seasons using the computer. You can also run some simulations on individual player matchups, but what I like to do number 4 here is for a lot of sims, you can take the pitcher card and you can take a batter card, and you can, without running a bunch of simulations, you can just say, you know, these two cards, when combined with each other in the game engine and the rules, are going to produce this result. And then you can see if that makes sense, particularly if one of the cards is either a league average pitcher or league average batter. And you can see the graphic on the right, but um, I subscribe to the Stratomatic card viewer. And the card viewer actually has this matchup methodology built into it where you can match um, two players against each other. And in the kind of the little blue area in the lower left, you can see what the expected batting average, on base percentage, and slugging is going to be if those two players were matched up. And I think this is Johnny Bench 1970, maybe Tom Seaver 1970, but it's kind of blocked on my screen. But anyways, that general approach of just matching up players and seeing if the results make sense is one way to do it. I just built a spreadsheet yesterday to do that for the long ball game. And then I've seen some hybrid approaches. One of them was for the modern game payoff pitch, where somebody actually replayed every at bat of somebody's season using the appropriate pitcher card and batter card, and then accumulated the guy's statistics. And it seemed to work. So, there's just a lot of different ways, but I think some are more robust than others. So I'm going to pause again before I would move on to a slightly different topic and see if there's any comments or questions.
Steve, I got a couple things going in my mind here. One, what do you do to prevent any bias creep? I know you're using, algebra, and you're using kind of set formulas, etc. Um, but one of the biggest things, I mean, there's always a concern about when you build these things is bias creep. You know, you think, I mean, whoever your favorite team is, and making them just that bit better because you think they are.
Yeah, I think the simple answer to that question is almost everything is formulaic. Now, it's a fair question. Is it the most robust formula? And for example, Larry, who's on the call, and I and another guy had lengthy discussions about what's the right way to come up with a base running speed / ability rating. And I have a relatively crude formula that I can use, for example, to almost perfectly simulate the Stratomatic running rating. So I just use that formula. But there's other data that, if you want to take the time to load it in and analyze it and create formulas, you could probably make things better. But for the most part, it's formulaic. The things that are hardest to make formulaic, in my mind, are outfielder throwing arm ratings. Because even though there's a lot of data available now that maybe wasn't 40 years ago, a lot of times it's based on small sample sizes. And so, do you have to incorporate judgment? And so I'm not sure bias is a big risk, but occasionally judgment has to be used. And that's the hard part.
Is the use of dice bring in the random factor? I mean, um, any of the computer games or simulations that are done through the computer, there's always that random factor that has to be added, which is the human factor, to be quite honest. Um, None of this is captured, is it? In these types of games and these types of cards.
Well, the premise that these games are built on is that whatever the mechanism is to produce the varied results, that it's truly random or close enough for practical purposes. But I've seen discussions where people go to the trouble for dice of actually getting casino dice because they're afraid that the regular dice may not be true. Um, I have a bunch of Excel-based dice rollers and helpers that I built for a lot of these games, but computerized random number generators aren't, in the most academic sense, aren't random. They're close enough, but they're technically not. And so there's that aspect. Something I've been toying with and maybe doing a video about is just something I've been thinking about, which is the variability and the distribution, so the probability curves that dice produce, is that the same probability or variability that you'll see in real life games? And I think it gets a mathematical answer, but on average, but you know, if you had, you know, uh, Pete Rose with his hitting streak, he was very consistent during that time. Um, Whereas you had somebody else that went 0 for 4 one day and 4 for 4 the next day. Um, the dice are never going to be able to reflect uh, any tendencies to be consistent or inconsistent, if that makes any sense. So there is, I guess, maybe I should have just answered your question. I don't know, but I think there's people smarter than I am, particularly about statistics, probably could comment on this, but um, I don't know if I answered your question, but
Yeah, somewhat. It's spawned another one, but I'll hold on to that. I see Mike actually has put something here. He's saying he's asking, has the evolution of advanced sabermetrics helped with the evaluation process, specifically metrics that measure against a player's performance against a league average?
yeah. So I was going to mention some of that on the next slide. So as it relates to sabermetrics, I think sabermetrics can help in terms of creating cards for for these sims. And I've biased myself or limited myself to the data that's on Baseball Reference. But particularly for modern teams, there's a lot of new data um, for both defense and base running and even pitching that could be used in lieu of whatever it is that I happen to be using. So um, I think the biggest question for me is, well, I embrace sabermetrics. I'm not really, I'm still learning about the whole topic, but I've done a lot of reading and research over the last 3 years. Um, I think the real question for me is, I think clearly for some of these ratings, like base running and um, defense and whatnot, that more modern metrics are probably better than anything that we had in the past in terms of assigning ratings to players. Um, I'm less convinced that sabermetrics should be the core of the game engine, and I have someone, an acquaintance, a friend in the hobby who has created games which are based on sabermetrics. So I'm not at all criticizing that work. I think it's a very interesting approach to creating games. Um, and so I think that that there could be a clean slate as we learn more and more. And I just added this to the bullet near the bottom. You know, we're entering a world of AI, and will AI in any way revolutionize uh, how these games are designed or how the players are rated? And I don't know, but it's entirely possible. It's possible that AI could have figured out the algebra for me. You know, uh, so I don't think we're done. 100 and some years ago, somebody in the patent office said everything that can be invented has been invented. I don't think we're there as it relates to baseball sims. So if we have time, I'll touch on just a couple more things. Uh, and I've done a video on this, but there's all kinds of interesting design considerations um, when you're doing a sim, and some of them relate to interdependencies, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. We already talked about uh, accuracy. A key one, which I have a slide for, is what are we trying to simulate? Are we trying to simulate the player's performance uh, in the actual season, or some measure of underlying skill? And related to that, what do we do with fringe players or outliers or what have you? And and then I'll talk about remote events and then the one bullet point at the bottom. I don't have a slide on this, but this is an area that I have not delved into, but some sims do, is some sort of cross-era normalization of the underlying data so that you can play, the 1919 White Sox against, the 1998 San Francisco Giants and have some meaningful result that isn't influenced by either the dead ball era or the performance enhancing drug era. I mean, it's all hypothetical anyways, but should there be some kind of normalization done? Before I jump into a few more slides, I debated what the right place was for this chart, and maybe I'll start with the saying at the bottom that even though I'm big on math, I realize that math is really the foundation, but in the end, it's a game, not a science project. And I think it's always important to keep that in mind. This little model here that I came up with a few years ago is kind of trying to describe some trade-offs. And the one on the right side of the triangle is probably the most important, which is a lot of times you can get a game that's statistically accurate or more accurate, but at the risk of making it more complex. And um, and the converse is true. Um, Likewise, you can bog down a sim with a lot of complexity, and all of a sudden, kind of the flow bogs down, and it may or may not affect the realism. I think the things in red are the ultimate goal. The game should be fairly easy to play. It should be fun, and it should evoke some nostalgia, which is, I think, again, the big driver here. In terms of interdependencies, I have one of them here, which just comes up with stolen bases. So you know the the ability to steal and the success rate is influenced by a lot of things. It's the pitcher's ability to hold the runner on or pick him off. It's the catcher's arm in terms of the runner, his ability to get a jump, and then just his running speed, if you will, once he gets the jump. And then there could even be other factors like, the running surface. Is it, artificial turf, natural, Uh, Umpires could come into it. And in modern times, the new rule for limiting throwovers to first base, But all these things are kind of interrelated. And the hard thing sometimes in these sims is how do you separate these factors into uh, individual skill ratings for the players? So, if the 1969 Mets didn't allow a lot of stolen bases, was that because of the pitching staff or because of Jerry Grody? Questions like that. So that's just some interesting stuff that you have to kind of sort out. And maybe this is, to your point, maybe this is where judgment and or bias could creep in. A lot of sims incorporate ballpark effects. A lot of times it's really just a determination of the home run rates, but it could be other things. I've seen at least one sim that has the ballpark effect, walks and strikeout rates as well, which is an interesting concept. But I think the key is if you're going to have ballpark effects in the sim, then you have to make the player cards somewhat ballpark neutral uh, in order for the everything to work out. And this is something I haven't delved into mathematically in any way. Excuse me, just more of in a conceptual way. And the other interesting thing I think as it relates to ballpark effects is um, I've seen some sims where the effects can change year to year, even though the dimensions of the park really haven't changed. And a lot of that is driven by just what happened to happen that year. If there were a lot of home runs hit the right field in Yankee Stadium one year, but fewer the next year, the ballpark card might reflect that somehow. Um, uh, I alluded to this, and this is my favorite example, but in 1971, Rennie Stennett uh, came up with the Pittsburgh Pirates. He had 165 plate appearances, and he hit 353, but he didn't make the World Series roster. So I've got this little graph here, but his performance was 353 batting average. His underlying skill was he's probably a 285 hitter. Um, you know, just to take those two numbers as granted, um, which number should be the basis for his card? Um, and so I've got some bullet points at the bottom as well. So if you're gonna say, well, I'm gonna really be focused more on underlying skill rather than performance, how do you identify underlying skill? And then, should any outlier performances be adjusted or normalized? Um, and at some point, does it just not make sense to make a card for a player? And there's two schools of thought on that. And some people want a card for anybody that had even one plate appearance or faced one batter. And I take a different approach with Sims is for players that weren't used that often, I lump them together and make a fringe batter card and a fringe pitcher card. Um, Anyways, this is just stuff that you have to kind of think about and deal with. And this again could be where some of this bias or judgment creeps in. Platoon splits is a big deal in Sims. I think there's two schools of thought, and one is the split effects should be generic and should follow the conventional platoon advantage where a left-handed pitcher does well against a left-handed batter and a right-handed pitcher does well against a right-hand batter, et cetera, et cetera. And then some other sims actually take the actual split data and card them as it happened, like we saw in that Dick Hall example. His splits were kind of opposite the traditional or conventional platoon advantage. And so when you're doing a sim, you need to decide how you're gonna deal with splits, if at all. But most sims these days um, do incorporate splits in some fashion. Um, Stratomatic is pretty explicit with their splits, as you can see, uh, kind of the advanced or super advanced side of their card. Um, yeah, that was all the slides. I do I do have or accept and encourage comments on my videos. I welcome emails. My email address is up there. And for my videos, I have a Google Drive where I save each of the PowerPoints that I use in my videos. And so some people have asked for copies of those as well, and I'll probably save this PowerPoint to the Google Drive as well. So those are my slides. Definitely welcome more discussion or questions.
Steve, excellent presentation. It's super informative and really fascinating to me. I'm sure to everybody else here. My question is specific to a couple slides back. You had like the fun factor, the nostalgia, the realism. Is there a particular vintage game that you found it kind of hits the sweet spot there with it's realistic, but it's not overly complicated? That um, any game that kind of strikes you as it's balanced well in that regard?
In terms of vintage games, um, I would say Batter Up probably fits that bill. The only issue some people would take with it is that it doesn't have specific left-right splits. Now, that said, it could, using my spreadsheet, similar to Sports Illustrated, they had left-right splits for batters. You could make a card with a left column and a right column and use the split data and do that. So, um, you know, long ball, I've been spending a lot of time with that. That's pretty easy to play, but unless you really like or can at least live with 50-50 game engines, um, I, I'm not sure that would appeal widely. I think maybe I'll answer a different way, and it's really not covered by the slide, but I think in general, I'm liking pitcher first game engines. So whether it's Sports Illustrated or Batter Up or Grand Slam is another one, or in the modern era, something like um, Payoff Pitch. Um, I think I'd like that, but that's just kind of a personal preference, I think, more than anything.
That kind of makes sense with the game being sort of controlled by the pitcher as far as, he initiates the action, right? So that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, the criticism you see about Stratomatic and other games is you'll bring in, I don't know, Aroldis Chapman, and every roll that inning is read off the batter card. It's like, a game that I alluded to, I think that's pretty interesting is that every at bat is a combination of pitcher and batter. It's not first or second. It's replay baseball overlays the pitcher card on top of the batter card, and the combination of those two things then lead to reading the results. And at least at a conceptual level, that appeals to me. I've only ever played one game of replay baseball, but that that feels right.
I guess the reverse to that question, and without offending anybody that either designed or played those games, but did you find any games that are overly complex or not as realistic as you'd like?
Well, the one game that I alluded to that I thought was maybe overly complex was Grand Slam, and it has the same game engine as Sports Illustrated and Batter Up, but they chose, from the dice standpoint, to use 4 6-sided dice, and you add them up, which creates even a separate distribution than what I showed you before. And I kind of felt that was overkill, and I kind of felt that adding 4 dice together just didn't feel like it was fun. I'd rather read 3 dice as a 3-digit number, or what have you. The other thing that Grand Slam had is you read a result, you went to a chart, and then from that chart you went to a second chart, and that felt awkward to me. And I'll just leave it at that. If you watch the video, you'll see what I mean, but that just felt a little awkward. It was sophisticated, but just clumsy.
Okay, so Larry's asking, is there a next game on the horizon for your analytical approach?
Let me be careful how I answer that question. So there have been a few games that I looked at that either I didn't have enough collateral to truly analyze the game, or I couldn't figure it out. And there's one I'm thinking of that I won't say the name of, but I had that situation that I just couldn't, the light bulb didn't go on. I didn't get the divine inspiration. More recently, and again, I'll be cautious here, but more recently, in the last couple of months, I spent a fair amount of time analyzing a vintage, well, it's now a vintage game called Ballpark Baseball. And it's kind of a complex game. It was still in print until about 5 or 6 years ago. It's no longer in print, but the creators are still alive. And so, again, for my own purposes, I've done a lot of analysis of the game. I've recorded a couple of videos about how the game works. I recorded a video about my preliminary analysis, which I think I've taken back down, because it's possible that the rights to well, it's not really a vintage game. It was still in print 5 or 6 years ago, but all I will say about that game is it's highly complex, and directionally I can see how the cards were put together, but there's something going on that either something I don't understand. And the game is complex enough that it was created by a professor. So, and it was in business for many years. Bill James played it, so I'm left with a lot of questions about how the game works, just because I'm curious. I don't know that I ever would really want to create my own cards for that game. But that's an example of something I've done. I don't know if there's anything else that I've got my eye on in terms of games. I've continued over these years, I've continued to tweak the uh, the spreadsheets that I've built in the past because I learn more or what have you. So I don't know. I've received suggestions from time to time from people, and that's how I got interested in ballpark baseball. But um, I don't know. It's time consuming to reverse engineer a game. In many cases, it's time consuming to generate the cards. Um, and in theory, I have other hobbies and I have a family, and so even though they've allowed me to spend the equivalent of a full-time job on this diversion, you know, I don't know that I want to take on another one, but that I have a friend who would lay odds the other direction. So
Yeah, my wife, we're kind of got retirement in the vision now, and she, I'm like, I have no idea what I'm gonna do. So, um, if I told her I was gonna do this, I think she'd kill me. But anyway,
yeah, this
I
wasn't on my radar screen.
I do have a theoretical question, and others might want to chime in on this. When you're creating a player and you look, strictly at the statistics, what do you do about a situation like we had last season where in the American League Central, you had four teams and a double A team? And the reason three of those teams got into the playoffs, I mean, one was guaranteed, but the other two was they got to beat up on the Chicago White Sox so bad. And if you look at their individual records against the White Sox, you can see that was the difference of them getting in the playoffs. Well, obviously, the player statistics are going to be elevated, bloated, whatever term you want to use, by playing against them. So, in a lot of the simulations in that, they don't necessarily play the same team. How do you get to what the player really is without that bloating? I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, they're closer to everybody playing the same amount, but they're not there. I'm
yeah, there would be ways to adjust for that, and that is that's an interesting question. A lot of times that question comes up more generically, which is when you're comparing players to the league average, like let's say I'm comparing the Pirates batters to the league average, shouldn't you take out from the pitching stats that you're using as the league average, shouldn't you take out the Pirate pitchers because they never faced them? In your case, yeah, there's probably a more sophisticated way to reflect the competition that they actually faced. I'll just put it more generic terms as opposed to trying to describe the math. But you're right. Um, what you described is an issue, and in a way, it's a little bit of this skill versus performance thing that I talked about. But it's just what's the right reference point in terms of measuring the player, and just like you know ballparks can be different, and so
Yeah,
should you be adjusting out ballpark effects, which I've not done with any of the sims that I've done so far. So
but
the more
but
sophisticated,
a lot of sims do have that.
yeah, the more sophisticated the sim, the more they take that into account. For example, I have a fairly consistent dialogue with one of the modern uh, the creator of one of the modern sims I mentioned. Um, and I think he alluded to the fact that he actually considers not the league averages, but the specific opposing batters or opposing pitchers that that person faced when creating a card, and in some way kind of, I, I'm assuming, takes into account what you were talking about. Um, if you really wanted to do it right, I think you'd have to take some of that into account. Um,
Yeah, it kind of just occurred to me through your presentation about that. So I might take a look at that. Might have to wait till I retire though.
Understood.
Got a question in here. Robert's asking, excluding extra innings, what do you consider the ideal time should be spent playing a game?
um, that's a good question because, as I said, I end up analyzing games much more than I end up playing. But um, for me, somewhere around 30 minutes. I know there are people that will slam through games um, quickly, mainly because they are doing season replays and they have hundreds of games to get done. Uh, for me, I like to strike a balance where, I'm thinking about the game, um, give some thought if there's a decision to be made, like pinch hitting or, you know, taking the extra base or whatever. I like to give a little bit of thought to that. Um, so I don't want to be in a real big hurry. I'm a bit of a deliberate person as it is. And so I think it would take away from the game if I'm rushing through it. On the other hand, I will have to admit, if I'm playing a game and there are runners on base and all of a sudden there's, a hit or what have you, I'm loving a game where I can flip a fast action card over and it tells me what happens to the base runners. And I don't have to do a lot of mental arithmetic or what have you. I could understand. See, one of the challenges of game design is it designed to be played solo or is it designed to be played head to head? And if it's designed to be played head to head, then you want a lot more um, kind of decision choice or decision points to be built into the game design. But if you're kind of playing it solo, I don't need to make a lot of decisions because um, you know I'm likely to be biased in favor of the Pirates, for example, or what have you. Um, and a lot of games actually, because of that, built came up with what they call auto manager charts, which enable solo play, and so like you're not going to bunt with a 10-run lead or what have you. So
Okay, we'll open it up. Anybody got some questions that they want to ask Steve? Don't be shy.
Thanks, Steve, for your previous answer to my question. I pretty much agree. Even though I'm playing solo 98% of the time, I do slam through games. But obviously, if you're playing head to head, there's more enjoyment. If you took an hour, then that's perfectly fine. But I think a half hour is pretty much my limit on a solo game. Such like replay, I can do it in a half hour. But long ball and strat advance is about 15 to 20 minutes on a good day. What I did want to ask, though, Steve, is there any using Stratomac as the example in trying to, would there be any, and of course it's a 50-50 engine, is there any value of they won't do this, of course, but if they ever extended the batter side to 6 columns for each side, lefty and righty, and the same with the pitches to create more statistical chances that could happen? Or
well,
would that bog things down?
I will say that, well, it could bog things down. I think, and I covered this in one of my videos. Um, about dice actually, but and precision, but with the splits that you see on a strat card, using the 20-sided dice, or in the old days, the deck of cards numbered 1 to 20, you can refine things down to something like 1 out of 4,000 and change in terms of precision of results. And so the precision is already built into the strat card. You can refine things down probably as much or more than you would ever need to. I think the challenge, if they were going to come out with, Strat 3.0 or 4.0, is somehow dealing with the inherent issues of the 50/50 engine. And so you'll find a way for Nellie Fox to not strike out off the pitcher card, or what have you. The only interaction on strat between the pitcher and the batter card that I'm aware of is batters are rated on power. I think it's normal and weak. And
Correct.
so,
A weak hit or a home run can turn into a single.
right. And that's about the extent of the fix that they put in for the 50/50 engine. It's a good one. But some people homebrew it. Like, for example, if a guy never hit a triple in the season, then any triple off the pitcher card is going to be like a double or something like that.
Right.
So there's a few ways to do that. But there are some 50/50 games where they did work in and kind of resolve the 50/50 engine. We had sometime in the last year, we had Deep Drive Baseball on this webcast, and he has a very cool way of dealing with that issue. Ballpark Baseball that I was talking about had a way to deal with it. And even Long Ball, which I know you play a lot, has some of that. Where, for example, low home run pitchers,
Right. It's driven off the board.
yeah, and the rating on either the pitcher or the batter card. But so, yeah. Thanks
Because
for.
I was going to say, I know you're a proponent, but say a guy never hit a triple, but you like to see the possibility it could happen. So
Yeah,
if you like to see it, the opportunity allowed.
I do if the sim allows it, and not every sim design allows it. And I think, let me go back for a second, but this is Bartolo Colon hitting his 1 home run. So, in a perfect world, a perfect sim, I think some remote possibility for anything to happen is a nice design feature, but not every sim is a design. It really can allow that. Other
Well,
people,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, other people say if a guy, if a guy didn't hit a triple that year, I don't want him hitting a triple in my sim.
Oh no, I was just gonna say last night I had Mark Belanger hit a homer off Fritz Peterson of the Yankees, and he didn't have any homers in '73. But other years, he had a couple. So I don't mind it, but realistically, he's not going to hit 10 or 20. If he gets 1 or 2, it's not, like you said, it comes back to that relative, accuracy, plausibility factor. Thank you.
Speaking of Fritz Peterson, I have not found a sim that has a feature for trading wives. So.
Nope.
You gotta love Big Sexy anyway. Hitting that home run.
And he was a hockey announcer for many years, by the way.
I didn't know that.
Yes. I think for one of the NHL teams off the top of my head.
Okay, anybody else got anything more for Steve? Okay, not seeing anything and conscious of the time. I'm gonna let Derek announce our next few groups. I just want to remind everybody, you got SABR 53 happening in Texas. And unfortunately, Derek nor I will be in attendance there, and there won't be a simulation meeting of sorts. We will have a meeting either in August or September without a guest to just get some guidance from the committee, see what people are wanting, see what people can help with, etc. We don't get a lot of volunteers, so Derek and I are going to stay on. Unless you really want to get rid of us, it wouldn't take much. Derek, what you got?
All right. Well, we've got next meeting is June 12th, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, with Kenneth and Roswell Miller. The Miller brothers designed the APBA Major League Players Baseball for the Apple II and IBM PC. And they later designed the APA Baseball for Windows Broadcast Blast games. So they're going to be with us on June 12th. And then we have July 8th, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, with Dean Patino. Dean is the founder of Baseball Classics, Legends of the Diamond. And he's also an author of several books. So those are the two confirmed meetings we have. Like Mark said, we'll probably have just a regular committee meeting in late summer. And I've got a couple guests in the queue, so hopefully we can get something else confirmed in that time frame as well.
Anybody have any questions for Derek or I?
Oh, I did want to mention, if anybody has suggestions, people you'd like us to try to get on, if you have any contacts with folks that have designed games, please pass them along to us and try to get them to speak at one of our meetings as well.
Sorry, I have one of my dogs here is trying to tell me something. Probably that I'm ignoring her too much. She's kind of bossy. Okay, anybody got anything else? Not seeing anything. I'll go watch the Jays choke another one to the Angels and cry.
We got to beat somebody.
Oh, 2 nights in a row.
I
Good thing
mean,
I live on the West Coast.
I hate to say in early May, wait until next year, but it's looking that way.
Good thing I live on the West Coast and I'm not going to bed too late. So, okay, guys, thank you for coming. If we recorded this right, it will be available. And if it's not, I'm going to run away.
I think we're okay with this one. So, Steve, again, thank you so much.
Thank
Great
you so much,
presentation.
Steve. This is really got my brain thinking, which is
Mine
always
too.
a good thing. Which is always a good thing.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
Good night, everybody. Go watch
Take
the
care.
Jays lose to the Angels.